Welcome back to our growing experiment. We're here with Fionna from the Flourmill Community Farm. We spoke to her before and she had some interest in what we had to say, so we figured we'd meet back with her and have another conversation.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for having me in your home.
No problem.
I just got to see their amazing growing dome. Super cool. And all the other things going on in their backyard.
Mm-hmm.
And we're here with Mara, the urban Pyrenees pup. She's very sweet.
She's our mascot.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I was really interested to hear about some of your background and how you came into food and farming and food systems, sort of your interest there, because I think it's really important that people know who you are as well. Yeah, so I was wondering if you could share a little bit about where each of you were born and raised, and maybe any like relevant ancestral ties that you have that might like influence who you are today as well.
Okay, well, I can start.
I should.
Okay, so I was born and raised here in Sudbury. My parents are immigrants from Portugal, so there's a lot in that background because we always had a garden growing up, and my parents just kind of knew a lot about farming just because of their family. And so in Portugal, we're in northern Portugal, and it's mainland, so we're not by the ocean. It's very much farm country, and it kind of still is today. And everybody is self-sufficient over there and doing their own thing, and my parents have a lot of those skills, and unfortunately by them moving here and living in the suburbs and everything, I didn't really gain any of that knowledge. So we're kind of interested in getting back to those ways a little bit. So my parents have helped us with what we're doing here with the gardens and everything. And yeah, anything to add, do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of basically like, and that's a little bit of inspiration I took too from them. And in 2019, we went to Portugal in the fall, and I had never been to Europe ever before. And so it was really cool for me to go there, and I was certainly struck by how self-reliant a lot of these people were in these small communities. Like Sophia's aunt, who is Tia Prezej, how old is she now?
She just turned 70.
She just turned 70, and still lives there, still has all kinds of apples and stuff she harvests, or sweet potatoes. Like everything she eats is basically from her land. The wine she drinks is from her land. And that's just you still buy your meat in town, but everything else you grow your own. And they have big pieces of property, and they hand that down because they understand, especially being an agrarian society, what they were for a long time anyways, that you need to feed yourself. And like Portugal especially too was, they were under a fascist dictatorship until like 76 or something like that. And a lot of people really had to fend for themselves, and they had to grow their own food. It was just, if you didn't, you died. I mean, it's just what it was. And so I had a lot of appreciation, a lot of respect for that. And so where I'm from a small town in northwestern Ontario. And I always kind of joke that like Sudbury is supposed to be northern Ontario. And I say I live I'm from 14 and a half hours north of here, and that's real northern Ontario. But anyways.
Yeah, no, I think you can say that like justifiably. So.
You're northern, right?
Yeah, we're like the near north.
Yeah, well, what I say, that's a relative to Toronto term is the way I think about it.
Yeah.
Because from a Toronto point of view, a funny sort of digression. We were in Ottawa one time, and we were going to see, I think it was the Governor General's building.
Yeah.
We were getting a tour, and one of the tour guides was asking, so where are you guys from and all that? And I was explaining where I was from. And so he says, oh, like GTA. And I'm like, no, not even close. And then I explained a little more. He's like, so GTA. And then I think he was kind of ribbing me a little bit. Okay. Right? But anyway.
You can legitimately say you're from Northern Ontario.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm from there. My mother was born and raised in Vermilion Bay. And my dad is from Newfoundland. And my dad moved to Vermilion Bay when he was like 27 maybe. And they met each other shortly after that. He got a job working at Nelson Granite, which is the place I mentioned I worked at, that made the coasters for our wedding. And yeah, exactly. Those were our favors. Our favors for our wedding. Yeah. So yeah, that's where I'm from. And then the reason I ended up here was basically because my sister went to school at Laurentian for a teaching degree. And while she was there, I used to go and visit her in late October, early November, because her birthday falls on the 10th of November. And I used to love going out to Halloween parties. Because this is all too where I'm back home and I'm working, my sister's going to school, and I'm like, and so I was a homeowner at 20. And that's because like in Vermilion Bay, like the house I bought, it was a 1,200 square foot, single floor. I paid $67,000 for it. And in property tax, I paid like less than $400 a year. So like my mortgage all in was like, I think it was $375 something, you know? So for a young person, like that's,
to go back to that.
yeah, and that you'll never see that anymore. But so I had kind of an expendable income, and I like to come visit my sister, and so I would come up and visit her all the time. And one year I come up to visit her, I went to a Halloween party, and that's where I met Sophia. I saw her first where we were in the cab going to the party. It was at a mutual friend's dorm, and we seen this woman who was trying to walk up through the snow. Instead of going around and up the path, she was walking through the snow in her high heels. And I was kind of like, look at this woman here, and we were kind of laughing, like making fun of her. And anyways, we get inside, and I go to relay this story to a new girl I just met, and turns out that story was about that girl.
It was me.
Yeah. So I was saying how it was so funny. This girl was going up the hill and sliding back, and going up the hill, sliding back.
Yeah.
He says, "Wow, it was me." And I was like, "Oh, okay," foot and mouth.
That's hilarious.
But anyways, we hit it off really well, and so basically for about a year we were dating like long distance, where every other month we'd visit each other, kind of thing. So like one month I'd go visit her, the next month she'd come visit me, and did that back and forth for a year.
Was that the first time you had gone so north too?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was like, it was a May long weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we had started talking again in February or March. Yeah, and we had been talking for a while after we had met, and then we kind of just had stopped talking for whatever reason. And then one day she sent me a Snapchat, I think. It was like, "Hey, what's up?" You know, kind of thing. It was like,
those days.
yeah, don't even use that anymore. But anyways, yeah, she says, "Oh, hey, what's up?" And we start chatting back and forth again. And then it was like, "Oh, you know, it'd be good to see you again sometime or whatever." And Sophia says, "Wow, May long weekend is coming up." And so she was ready to hop on a plane. Now, mind you, my sister's really good friend was the friend's dorm that we met at. So it wasn't like I was a total stranger character-wise.
Yeah.
But still, she was like, "I'll get on a plane and fly up to the middle of the north and stay at this guy's house." I mean,
Trusting.
it turned out pretty well.
Yeah.
Well, it was like, you know, she was courageous enough to take the chance, or silly enough.
Something like that.
And sometimes those things are the same thing.
Yeah.
She was walking up the hill in her heels, and she was ready to take a plane, pretty determined. I can see why you married her.
Yeah, she does it her way.
Yeah.
But
So yes.
so then sorry, I'm a bit long-winded.
No.
So anyways, after that, I ended up moving up here. We were together for a year before we got married. Then we got married, and then after that we were looking for a house.
Yeah.
And then we found this house, which was a nice compromise, because originally we wanted to have something with more land. Because I didn't know specifically that we wanted to be involved in growing our own food like we kind of are now. Right. But I knew I wanted something with a little more space, because I come from that small town. And we happened to find a place that was really close to her parents. And it also kind of gave us the pretty exceptionally big backyard for a suburb. And it was a terrain that most people, I think, would look at and think is not usable, because it is an unusual, say, gardening terrain. But it was something we were able to sort of turn around and use. But anyways, long enough story.
Yeah, well, that's great. It's good to know where you came from and where you met and all these things. And yeah, very cool. And so that must have been a big shock for your parents to like come from Portugal to North. Did they immediately come to Northern Ontario, or did they?
Sudbury.
Okay, so
yeah, because the first person from my family to come here was my uncle, and he came here because I knew Co.
Okay, yeah. So that would be probably a shock of like, I don't know when your parents came, but you know, the landscape would have been a lot different.
Yeah, it was all rocks, is what they say.
And the growing season would have been quite shorter, and the winters would have been quite more harsh. So yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
And so you were kind of mentioning that you did have a garden growing up, like your parents still gardened, even though it was a very different situation.
Yeah.
And so my next question was about that, and you kind of answered it, but you know, you had the tradition of farming and gardening in your family, and what was your relationship to nature as like a child or growing up?
None.
No?
To be
Yeah.
honest, I stayed inside a lot. I didn't like we kind of just more like hung out with friends, that type of thing, but we wouldn't go out too much.
Yeah.
And the garden wasn't something I was even interested in.
Okay.
My parents took care of that, and then I'd
Yeah.
help if they needed it.
Yeah.
But no, I didn't spend too much time outside, if I'm honest. Jordan
Yeah.
did way more because he's from,
Super northern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but we're just kind of in the suburbs, so you know, I'd go to school and then come home, spend time with the family. We're really big on family, so I
Yeah.
was with my family lots. Like on the weekends, we always had family dinner and everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of funny because I don't really have much of a background like outdoorsy growing up.
Mm-hmm.
That's just come a little bit more now,
Mm-hmm.
just because of what we want to do. Because I mean, really, even if I see certain bugs, I'm still kind of like, "Ooh."
Yeah.
I'm trying to get past that, especially for our little
Yeah.
ones, so that they're not like that.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think it's something that I wish I would have been more outdoorsy when I
Yeah.
was younger.
Mhm.
So I'm kind of, you know, trying to have our kids kind of be more like that. So like I mentioned before, right? My parents kind of tried to get away with the farm life, and we're just kind of trying to
Yeah.
get back in with nature.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they were okay, leaving that life and coming here. Obviously, they wanted to pursue something
Mhm.
here, and
Well, it should be mentioned too also that Sophia's father is the youngest in 8.
Yeah, they are 8.
Yeah, the youngest in 8.
okay.
And so his brother that's still here that we go and have dinner with very often. They're how many years apart?
Oh, I don't know. 8 maybe?
About 8 years apart. Now they also had very different growing up experiences. So her uncle, being one of the older brothers, worked on the farm, worked very hard. I mentioned the sort of form of government they had there before. There was mandatory military service. He served in the military.
He didn't. My other uncle did.
You're right. Sorry, he just aged out of it, right? He
I
missed
think
it.
so,
Yeah,
yeah.
he just missed it because Zay went. Because Zay's a year older than him.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Sorry. So he just missed military service, but his older brother had. And this is while too, a lot of the colonies of Portugal are basically like, we don't want you to be here anymore, and there's all these rebellions happening and stuff like that. And that's basically what ends up leading to the fall of the fascist government. Is they're like, the military basically says, we're not doing this anymore. This is, and then they have a democratic election, and anyways, the rest is history. But so her father, because his older siblings grew up on the farm and worked really hard, and there was no like education really there for anybody. Like most of them might have, like your mom maybe has a 4th grade education.
Grade 5.
Grade 5. Right, and so none of them had that opportunity, and Armindo's sisters, being older, wanted to give him a different opportunity, and so they had him move to Brazil when he was 16? 17
or 18, I think 17.
And so he had a chance to get a much better education than he would have gotten in Portugal. And he got a lot more opportunities because of that. He ended up being a small business owner there. He had it was a milk delivery service. Because that was, everyone drinks fresh milk.
Yeah.
Everyone eats fresh bread there. It's a totally different food culture, but that.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, so I mentioned that because part of the reason, I guess you could say, that her parents would have not looked at the farming thing as something they would want for their kids is because they grew up really hard work, like, and then they could move to the city and have like an urban life, which is much less labor intensive, like Sophia mentioned, not really having to work.
Yes. Yeah.
Where like say her mother probably was picking all kinds of stuff in the field all the time, was probably slaughtering chickens and doing all these other things, right? And it was a lot more work. So like I think that's probably why you would see that, but they still have an appreciation and a love for that too. It's like they have pride in growing their own food and stuff like that. They still have a lot of Portuguese pride.
Yes, yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
still a big part of who they are.
Yeah.
But it was definitely, they were looking at like a different life, and like, you know, there's rewarding part about this life, but it's really hard working, and when you're living a hard life like that, people are harder. And when you live an easier life, you have a sort of a privilege of being a little bit easier going, a little more relaxed. And so that's where I would see, like, because I don't want to say better, because I don't think it's better necessarily, but
exactly.
that's the value I would see in that. Do you think that's about right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like my dad being in Brazil and getting educated and all that, like, definitely makes him different from his siblings who were on the farm longer and all of that. So, okay.
Yeah. Do you remember eating the food from your parents' garden?
I remember going and picking tomatoes and beans and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's definitely a memory.
Yeah, those are nice memories.
Yeah.
For sure. And then the food culture in Northern Ontario, I know in the last podcast you kind of talked about like what you were more used to eating like growing up, but then we know that like the food system in Northern Ontario is based in like forests and fresh water in a big way. So were you having hunted meats? Like were you having fish? Like what kind of
like it wasn't like it was a staple. Hunted meats would have happened much later on. That was a thing. I get lots of big ideas in my head, and I thankfully Sophia helps me with pursuing some of those ideas. But when I was like 13, 14 years old, I got it in my head that I wanted to go and start hunting and learn how to hunt and all that kind of stuff. And I did, earnestly. And so I said, Dad, like, maybe we can get into this, we can do this together and all that kind of thing. And then in around 13, 14, you also start to get introduced to like, girls and other things that are kind of interesting and fun. And then all of a sudden, like, why am I going to go hang out in the bush? So that's for me, like, I had, like, growing up, I, like, lived outside. Like, me and my friends were on our bikes, because I lived in a small town, so we were on our bikes all day. Like, it was like, you had breakfast, you got on your bike, and you left. And then Mom's like, I'll see you later. And then you got home when it was getting dark or whatever, or you come home to eat and whatever else. And then when we weren't doing that, we would go like sucker fishing. Like there was a creek you'd go down to, and if we didn't have a net, you'd go out and try to catch them with your hands and all that. And you wouldn't eat those, but you'd sell them to camps. Camps would use them as bait. We would go fishing lots. Like so when I was younger, especially, my dad used to go fishing like all the time, where he'd fish maybe 3 or 4 days a week. And then as we got older, it was more like a weekend thing, but we were out on the lake lots, on sleds, lots for ice fishing, we'd do that. And then the hunting started there, when 14, 15 years old. And then my dad was getting deer or moose. Well, moose if you got a ticket or a tag for it or whatever, but often deer. So we'd have that a lot. But then, so the other thing about living up there is we had like a co-op, which is a fairly good store, but because you're isolated too, you're not really, I don't think, getting a lot of good quality stuff. Like we're on the highway, but like it's a little kind of backwater town kind of thing. And like, so growing up for me, and I mean, this may be because we didn't have a ton of money first, like we kind of, the home situation changed as my dad got like better paid at work and all that kind of stuff, right? And Mom got a better opportunity where she was working or whatever. That all kind of changed, but I can remember eating like lots of canned stuff or like processed stuff like fish sticks. Or like those packaged breakfast sausages and stuff like that. And then that was a big thing actually for me. That was a change. And so in my bachelor years, I continued eating that. Like I eat lots of prepackaged stuff, lots of frozen stuff. And then when I started eating over with dinner with Sophia's parents, and like everything is like, and it's like basics. Like you're always getting meat and you're always getting potatoes or rice, right? But it's very simply seasoned too. Where like I was kind of used to putting sauces on stuff, maybe to cover up the taste of the processed food I was eating. But over there it was like, you got salt, pepper, garlic, paprika, olive oil. That's about it.
It's the main ones.
And that's what you're mostly eating most of the time. And everything was always like, it was like, it was just meat and potatoes, and it was like it was a different change, but it was like it just felt like good food all the time. And like I was in a bad habit of eating like fast food too, especially like in the early time when me and Sophia were together. Or going to gas stations and grabbing energy drinks and all that kind of stuff. Anyways, I got off on that thing.
It's very interesting because you're mentioning like growing up really, really close to the land, always being outdoors. You had more of a city experience, but your food culture was more like to your roots, like the garden and your parents cooked in a specific way, and you were out on the land and you did have fishing and stuff like that. But then you might have had like more of these processed foods. So it's interesting to see like the contrast. Like we both have had a little bit of it's really neat to see how it's comes together in what you're creating here. It's really cool. And so my next question was going to be about like, your relationship to food, and like where the like if you had disconnection at different points in your life, and then what was what was the thing that sort of like rekindled your connection to food, or that you realized that you needed to connect to food again? Like did that happen when you were together? Like how did this thing turn on to be like, hey, we need to start growing our food and we're going to start researching geodesic biodomes? Like, what was that?
Well, I think for both of us, I had a period of time where I got really into fitness. And when you get into fitness, you get into nutrition.
Right.
Right? Because you start figuring like, oh, I want to put on muscle. How do I do that? I need a certain amount of protein, a certain amount of carbohydrates, a certain amount of fats, or whatever, right? Yeah. And Sophia, kind of the same thing, got really into fitness for a while and really into the diets and stuff. And we both found ourselves, I guess, finding, we were more inclined towards paleo. Yeah. Was that right? Yeah, it was keto, sorry.
No,
keto.
It was more paleo.
Was it paleo?
Yeah.
Anyways, so
paleo's low carb.
Right, but the emphasis was also too on being more natural, unprocessed foods, which I think we both liked. I could see that resonating with you more because of how you would have grown up, the food you were eating. And then for me, it would have been like, I was learning like, oh, a lot of that stuff that I was eating is not really that good for you. Like, say, margarine, right? So I grew up eating lots of margarine, and I come to find out that, if I'm not wrong, it was originally intended to be a mechanical lubricant, and it was basically repurposed. And they're like, oh yeah, you can eat this. So then they just give it to people. And so that was a thing that I grew up eating lots of. And then learning like, oh no, there's all these kinds of, like, processed food is really bad. And it's just not, so what I was kind of learning was like, if I want to be like trying to get fit, I need to be actually eating good food. Like I'm eating this crappy food, I'm kind of shooting myself in the foot. So I had inclination towards that. But I guess poor impulse control because I would still eat crappy food.
Yeah,
but
we all have a little bit of that.
Well, and so that's where I kind of like I always say that like Sophia kind of gives me a lot more structure. Like she grounds me in a lot of ways, and I think that's one of the things too where I was like, I like this kind of food, and she's like, I like this kind of food. She's like, well then we'll just eat that kind of food, and like we won't buy the crappy junk food because like. To this day, if there's like a bag of chips in the house and I know it's there, I'm gonna eat that bag of chips.
Yeah, until it's gone.
Yeah. So you can't have it in the house. Kind of you put healthy choices in there.
Yeah.
But as going from that, and I think it kind of stemmed in a little bit from like I study lots of history and I study lots of philosophy, and I was kind of like thinking about where does our food come from. Because if it's an essential building block to our life, where does it come from? Like that seems like an important thing to know. What's the real cost of food? And like when you start kind of looking into that, what I ended up getting interested in, and it might have been from some exposure to, no, that's not right. Because I listen to lots of podcasts and stuff like that. And I try to consume as much information as I can. And it just, because we had a tendency towards sort of more natural foods and stuff like that, I think that might have been what kind of led me into more like permaculture type ideas. Yeah. And then I would come back, so what I would do is like I'm listening to my podcast, I'm at work, I would come home and I'd say to Sophia, oh, like I was learning this thing about this, and we talk about it, and she'd be like, oh yeah, that's really cool. And then we kind of, and then, like we just kind of started thinking like, well, maybe we should grow our own food. Like, like maybe we could grow good food here. And like in the very, like the first year we did gardening, I don't know how much we were thinking about how much food we could grow for ourselves.
No, it was just, we just started with little garden boxes. Yeah. But I think something that definitely started all this too was just starting a family too, where it wasn't just like us wanting to be healthy, it's our kids too, right? So I'd say that was a big part of it too.
Yeah, and well, part of it too, I think, like I said, like I like studying history and philosophy and stuff like that, and it led me to be very suspicious of certain structures, just because of the way history rolls out. Like it's the way it appears to me is that things are not what they seem. You got to kind of ask a lot of questions and reflect, and then look a little bit more, and then question what you've come to now know is your new fact, and then realize that maybe you're probably wrong about something there, and then you kind of keep going back and forth, and so partly because of that I started thinking, like, well, things keep getting more expensive, they say the climate is changing a whole bunch. If it's the case that the climate is changing as bad as what it's said to change, then we're going to have some really serious issues acquiring food in the future, because how much of our, say, fruit and vegetable comes from California or Southern Ontario even. And if you just think, if one of the longer food chains gets cut down, well, Southern Ontario has to feed Southern Ontario. Right? You're going to have a hard time telling someone in the area, like, no, you can't have this food, it's going up there. They said, well, I'm hungry, right? And when I started, because one of the things that I thought about it is, like, if you really took seriously the idea that we are in dire straits, then I don't think a lot of people's behavior matches what they're sort of saying with their mouth.
Right.
And so to me, and this has to do with Sophia sort of being like, let's ground these ideas in reality. Let's actually manifest something here. Let's build something here. I was like, you know, if this is really going to be bad as they say it is, we need to really start thinking about where our food's going to come from. Like, even if it's just the case that we can grow 30% of what our vegetable intake is in the backyard, that's 30% we're going to save on, you know, our grocery bill. And then also we're going to have more nutrient dense food because it's fresh off the vine right there. We also have total control of what chemicals go into it, if any. And if we don't want them, they won't go in there. And so it gives us a lot more sort of control and a lot more independence. And I think that was the thing that really appealed to us too, because I have a lot of respect for people who are self-sufficient, who can survive on their own. And I think as humans, we're naturally social beings and we rely on each other a lot. But I also think, like, and this is partly, I think, a bit about being a northerner too. Because I come from an area where people are so isolated, it wasn't expected that anyone was there to serve you. And especially because the area I grew up in, the idea of like social services, it's like non-existent. So you take care of yourself and you figure out how to make things work for you, right? And bit of a digression, but that's partly why you see so much more alcohol use in the north, right? Because they don't have access to lots of services there. And so, you know, you have a beer. It's just what it is. You self-medicate, right? You take care of yourself. But I have a lot of respect for the idea that people believe they can take care of themselves. I have a lot of respect for resilience. And I think that's what you have to survive. And when I looked at those kind of things, I kind of thought, like, yeah, we really got to have our own food here. And then as we started playing with that idea more, I said, you know, because we were looking at these permacultures, we had seen urban food forests and stuff like that. And I said, well, how much food could we actually grow on a suburban lot? I said, you know, if we planted like fruit trees and this and that and the other thing, I said, we could probably grow like a lot, if not most of our food, if we planned it properly. And then you start looking into like, oh, well, how do we save space? Because we have limited square footage. Well, vertical gardening is a great thing. Then you start building it up into the air, right? And that's basically unlimited. As long as you put your plants in the right area and you stage everything right, everything gets a nice amount of sunlight. You can even use that to provide shade to other plants or whatever. But then, yeah, you can grow lots of stuff. And then also when we were looking into that, we were, you know, because we're growing a new family and we're both very busy. I mean, Sophia's at the house right now, but she's really busy taking care of the kids, and I gotta work. And then if you want to come home and then do a garden and all that, that's more and more work. And I'm not inclined to working 12, 18 hours a day. I mean, I'll do it when I have to, the odd time, but I don't be doing it all the time. And so we started thinking about like, well, how can we make this sort of, and I like permaculture because it talked about using these more natural systems that you could try to work with Mother Nature in a symbiotic relationship. So it's like, it's mostly her doing the work. You're just making sure there isn't an overabundance of this or an overabundance of that. Because I can trim off those edges and keep it in like this relative sweet spot, but I won't be able to keep it in the perfect, you know? And so we started thinking about that, and we started talking about, like, you know, even our front yard. Like, yo, we got this big lawn. And I had to go mow this lawn every week or whatever. Well, like, what the hell good is that doing me? And it's just, you look at, like, what, and now this might be one of these silly, like, facts. It's not a fact that people say anyway. But it's like, you know where a lawn comes from? It was basically like a gentry thing. It was like, I have this land that I don't have to use to farm. Is that there's any basis?
I think so. I've heard that.
It sounds right, right? Because you're like, I have this fertile land, and look, it's just perfect green grass. I'm gonna go play polo on it or whatever, right? And then you look at some person who needs food, and they're like, I could grow a lot of cabbage on there. How about you just cut a corner? Like, give me a corner there. I'll grow some rye. You know, I'll tithe you some. You know, 10%, 15%, whatever. It's like, no, that would really kind of make that corner not look nice. But we kind of thought like, oh, well, what can we do with the front yard? Because square footage, right? We need square footage.
Mm-hmm.
And Sophia kind of had this idea, and I think it's kind of cool, or I sort of see it as like a concept for a front yard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, instead of the idea of a suburban front yard being like this perfectly cut, nice lawn or whatever, it's like, what about like a food forest? What about like wildflowers that are great for our indigenous insects that pollinate and stuff like that? What about fruit bushes that just basically grow that you trim every now and again and drop fruit? And then that's food that we can eat, that's food for birds and all that other kind of stuff. And then you grow it the right way, it's beautiful too. Because I think maybe people think like it might be an eyesore or that kind of a thing, but I think if you do it right, there is a way to maintain this sort of natural beauty that is a little more wild, that is also a more productive use of the land. And yeah, like that's for us, I think too, is like kind of wanting to be a little more a part of a natural cycle in a way too.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's what we learned too lots with talking to people about all the farming and stuff like that, and doing it ourselves is like, because of the climate, you know, we can't grow certain times of the year, right? Because we have short growing seasons here. So that's partly why we got the dome, right? So like, wow, if we want to maximize our yield, we have to maximize our growing season. So then, like, you know, that one set of Roma tomatoes I've had in there since March.
Yeah.
Right? So now I've had, who grows their tomatoes from March to November?
Yeah.
Tomatoes were out for most people a month ago.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's it.
So, anyways, that's another
it's really
long-winded,
cool.
whatever.
Well, it's great, and so it seemed like this move came with like fitness and you starting a family, and then and interesting to hear about your progression of like, let's start a little garden, let's start, you know, an annual garden. Wait, this is way too much work. Let's go to perennials. Like, you guys did that pretty fast, like in a good way. Like, I think it takes it. I've been farming for like almost 10 years, and I'm just being like, I need to switch to perennials because this is like taking too much water, it takes too much work. Like, I need to just put a bunch of strawberries and asparagus into these spaces and wildflowers and all of these things. So it's really cool that you guys came to that realization, like, you know, in the amount of time that you did.
And I think like we basically started, because we had been off social media for years. We didn't have Facebook, nothing for years. We just weren't really into that. And then we just got back on social media when we got the dome, because we figured it made sense what we were doing, and we were thinking, okay, we're doing it in the suburbs. Let's, you know, document it a little bit, let people see kind of what we're doing. And it just kind of evolved from there, where, you know, we just want to kind of share the idea that you could do it kind of anywhere. Like, obviously we have a good sized lot, so we're more fortunate than others perhaps, but you know, you could make it work. You just have to be creative and resourceful.
And so, the idea of like trying it on your own, becoming like self-sufficient in this way, but then you're creating community around what you're doing and like around your podcast. Like, you've created community, I think. So it's like really, really cool, I think, how that's happening.
I think, just to add to that, I think what's fun about the community aspect of it is, you know, we want to be self-reliant. So it was like, okay, like we have to learn how to make our clothes. We have to learn how to, you know, do everything, right? But then we realized that's not really a thing. You need a community, right? So where basically our focus is more like on the food thing, because that one's really important to us. But I mean, we're not spending time making soap on our own, but we're going to the Sudbury market and we're buying soap there. We're trying to still shop local and support our community. And, you know, I could go to the Sudbury market and speak to people that I've met either through the podcast or just at the market, and building that community and basically getting our needs met by other people instead of going to Walmart or Costco, that kind of thing, right?
Sure.
Well, and that's another thing too. So like you said, we can't do everything. So we can grow a lot of our vegetables and some of our fruits, but we don't have any room here to do cows or goat or any of that kind of stuff, right? And so we support a local farmer. Like this is an idea I've mentioned a couple of times, but there was this show on Netflix, and it followed this guy Killer Mike, or it was his kind of show, and he's a rapper from Run the Jewel, I think is his group. And he was talking about like how long does a dollar stay in the African American community in the States? And he's like, it's like 2 days. He's like, if you look at different communities in the States, it stays in there for a week or 10 days or whatever. But that idea of how long does a dollar stay in the community really struck me, because I looked at that as like, people want to talk about community investment. What are we doing with the money that we're spending on our basic everyday needs? Because that's an investment we're making every day, but we're making this investment in Walmart. We're making this investment in Amazon. That's why their stocks are so good, because they have good investors every day. And I started thinking, like, if I want Sudbury to do good, I have to put my money into Sudbury. I have to believe that when I go and make my money here and I work hard and I want to see a good community for my kids to inherit one day, I have to go give my money to a food producer in this area, and I'm going to do that because I know this person is growing a high quality food. I know they're working hard, and I know they're going to take this money and they're going to feed their family with it. And then hopefully they're going to take that dollar and they're going to go buy some lettuce off somebody because they're too busy growing, they got their cattle or their chickens or whatever they're doing, and they're going to give it to someone else in the area. And then that person's going to go buy soap off somebody. And then so now we can get that dollar to circulate a few more times, and then finally it'll go out because they had to get a book off Amazon or whatever the case might be. Like I'm not unrealistic in the idea of like isolationist kind of thing, but it's like you have to really take seriously the idea of investing in your community. It starts with every person, and it starts with us as consumers because of the consumer-oriented society we live in. It is absolutely essential that we take our money and we give it to people in our community. And when like you can't be surprised when there aren't thriving businesses here when you don't go to local businesses. Right? You can't be surprised when farming's so hard, because it's so hard to like do it in a small scale and provide a local, because like someone says, oh, I don't want to pay 30% extra. It's like, but that's not even like we're looking at that in just a dollar figure, but it's like, okay, what value are you getting for this meat? What sort, like, let's say if you want to look at a big scale farming when it comes to meat especially, and this is one of the best arguments that people who are against meat have against meat. It's absolutely, it's awful. It's unbelievably awful what they do to these animals. It's no sentient being should have to endure that. But animals like us, like every living thing on this planet, will die. And so a lot of these animals that live on these small scale farms, they have happy, healthy lives. There's one day where the farmer walks up and they're like, hey man, what's going on? And then lights go out. But then that farmer who is, through that sacrifice of that animal, fed his family, provided a high quality food that's feeding other families. That animal is loved and appreciated in a way that a nameless animal 666,570 that doesn't. That animal down that little farm probably had a name. Oh, this is the bee ear, so that's Bessie, or what, and Bessie, Betty, whatever, That animal was loved, and then it's loved when it goes to the person who ends up eating it. And it's to me, and the other thing too that drives me nuts. It drives me nuts when you go to the grocery stores and they have these automated tellers. And I've said this to people at the stores. I say, those things are taking your job, right? And like, I get no one wants to do these sort of, not even like using this term because it sounds disparaging, but menial tasks. Listen, everybody in society sort of has a sort of role to fill. All of us are better at some things and less good at some things, or we have some sort of life circumstance that sort of put us at a disadvantage or whatever. But we're all going to need work. We're all going to need relatively meanable work where we feel like we're needed. And being a teller or a person who stocks shelves and stuff like that, that has a chance to be a really respectable, meaningful job for a person who can feed their family. And we're saying, well, we can just do that away with a machine. And it's like, okay, maybe that saves you a little bit of money here and there, but now what is this person going to do? And you say, oh, well, we'll give them a certain amount of money and we'll tell them to stay home. It's like, that's not a human, like this is another one of these things I like saying. Man doesn't survive on bread alone. It's not about the food. It's not about the money. It's about, you have to get up in the morning and feel like what you're going to do matters in some way. And I feel like that's one of the reasons that people are so, I wanted to say listless, but it's not the right term. People are so depressed and cut off, it seems like. And I feel like part of that is because we've dehumanized all these interactions, because as natural beings, we also like low friction. And if we can do everything online, that's no friction, right? Now you don't have to worry about fixing your hair to go to the grocery store because, you know, you don't want to look bad there or whatever. You don't want to talk to people because maybe it makes you feel uncomfortable or whatever it is, right? But the problem is like now all these people are totally miserable and upset. So they're going to the doctor and they're getting antidepressants and all this kind of stuff. They're being told there's something wrong with you. You have some kind of chemical imbalance, whatever the case might be. It's like, but how about we consider the fact that human beings have never lived like this as far as we can tell in human history ever. Like we've never been this cut off from each other socially. And you could say social media, oh, we're super connected. That is a total like, you online is not you. And that's why people talk the way they talk online. Like there's not like even if there was some hot button topic that me and you were in total other worlds against, but we had at least like say this level of a sort of relationship where we've talked to each other twice now, right?
Yeah.
I feel like I've probably represented myself in a way where like, you know, you feel like I'm trying to talk to you and I'll respect your opinion and that kind of thing, and I sort of have that. I believe it's a mutually implied kind of thing. Like if I show you that, you'll show me the same thing kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And we can go from that and be like, there's certain stuff that you see people say online that you would never say to a person in their face. And the reason you wouldn't say it isn't because you're a coward or whatever else. It's because it's an awful thing to say to a person a lot of the time. There's stuff to say online.
Yeah.
And it's because that avatar on the screen is not a human.
Yeah.
It is sort of a representation of a human, but it's not in your face right there. Like there's a disconnect there. And I think that's a clear like that's to me that sort of represents how clearly disconnected we are from each other. And kind of looping back around to the idea of community and all that. When it comes to paying that extra 30%, that dollar is well spent to me because of all of those reasons where I can rehumanize all of these interactions. Like I love that I know the people who grow my chicken. I'm like, oh, I like this chicken. I kind of like this chicken. What are these guys doing? Whatever. And then it's kind of fun, you know? And then I like the idea too when you invite someone over to your house, you're like, well, this is our family wine. We do a wine thing every year together. This is our family wine. These potatoes here we grew this year. And then carrots we grew this year too. You know, this rabbit here we got from Flourmill Farm. And then, you know, we got this from here and this from here. And it's a kind of cool, fun little story, right?
Yeah.
And people all kind of like that idea. I like the idea that's fresh. I like that it romanticizes it a little bit. Like, why not fall in love with food again? Why not fall in love with our community? Like, and that's one of these things too. Like, especially the last couple of years, we're gonna be. It's probably gonna be a couple of generations to unlive what happened in these 2 years. Like the I don't like using this word very often, but the trauma that basically everyone experienced from this. The people that weren't having their social needs met before, in the sense that they weren't socializing enough, are pushed further into a sort of reclusion now. The people that sort of were just getting by on that they're not getting that at all now, you know. And now people are kind of still afraid to get together. And one of the things that I learned for my value, for like me, was like, you know, if I have to live my life not seeing my loved ones and my family, that's not a life to me. And if it means, you know, there's a higher chance I'm going to get sick or die or whatever the case might be, if I can't see my family, then what the hell am I doing? Like, to me, that's not a life. Like, I'm alive. Yeah, sure, I'll stay safe. I look at all like, because I love history, I look at all these people who lived in way worse, way dire straits with way less chances of surviving. That it was like almost like, depending on what time you say you grew up in England with all the wars they were having with France, if you were like a 16-year-old boy, your chances of survival were like none. Because you were like old enough to go and fight, and you went and got killed by some noble in some stupid war, but whatever, or some succession of a crown or whatever. So basically, I was like, oh yeah, if you survive one or two of those, and you get to like 20 some odd, maybe you'll live. But it was like, you know, so no one expected that you had any time at all. And I look at all of human history and how few people have, and even today, how few there's a lot of people in our world today who don't realistically have the expectation of living past 16 or 20 or whatever it is, right? And so no day is guaranteed to you. And I just, like, you can't live your life in fear. You just, there's new risks. You gotta,
Well, and I think maybe we touched on it before in the other podcast, but like how gardening and food and community, like was this point of like togetherness during the isolation because we were allowed to be outside together.
Mhm.
You know, there were limits on how many of us could be there, but we were still allowed to be there.
Yeah.
And the farmers market was still allowed to operate.
Yeah.
You know, there was still, you know, we were still able to gather because of food. So it's like,
Yeah.
it's really nice.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, so when you were thinking about putting in another sort of growing system in your backyard, were you kind of weighing, you know, should we go for a greenhouse? Should we go for a high tunnel? Should we go for a dome? Or did you know it was the dome? Like, what kind of research went into it, and how did you guys decide ultimately?
We were just interested in extending the growing season and maybe getting a greenhouse. That's where it initially started, and then Jordan did some research, and then we found the domes. We thought they were cool looking. We liked the idea of what they brought to us of extending the season and everything. So then we just looked into it further, and then we kind of thought, you know, sometimes you have to kind of just take the plunge and do something, because obviously it's not like a little investment either. It's it's something we had to really think if we wanted it or not. But I think we just kind of had to do it. It wasn't really an option anymore to just wait till next year.
Right.
Because even like the trees and bushes that we planted, like we're not really gonna get much of that in like years from now. So you could easily say, you know what, maybe we'll outgrow this house in a couple years, so we're just not going to do anything. We said no, we just got to kind of move forward and do what we think is best.
Cool.
Yeah, and when it comes to doing the research, again, one of the things that I wanted to look at was passive as possible. Because I was like, well, you know, we got the sun, it heats up all kinds of stuff. How can we, you know, I don't want to have a heater out there because it's going to cost me more money. I don't want to have a propane heater out there because I have an unattended sort of propane fire going on out there. Or, I mean, there's relatively safe ones you can get that you can leave unattended overnight. But passive was the big thing. I wanted something that, and then too, I like the idea of having like, so it's got the solar vents on there, and so that's a bit automated, so I don't have to worry about that. The only thing that needs to happen is like in the summer, Sophia's got to go out there and make sure the door is open so it gets good breeze going through, but the vents are all open, the fans will come on. Make sure you water it when it's appropriate, and trim the plants as you need to, but like, you know, to me, it was like, it seemed like it was user friendly. I like the idea of retaining as much passive heat from the sun as possible. I thought the under soil heating thing was really cool. The tank too, because that's another sort of heat retainer, right? It's a heat sink. And then I just thought it looked really cool. Like I always say, it makes me think of like what you put on Mars. Like I just thought it looked kind of cool.
That is so cool.
Yeah, and it sounded like it would do what it said it would do, and actually so far it's delivered on that pretty well.
Yeah. And where did you source it from? Like, where did you get it?
So
it's
Arctic Acres.
Yeah, it's a company here in Ontario.
Oh, it's in Ontario?
Yeah.
Wow.
So they're not,
Very cool.
as I understand it, the designers. Growing Spaces out of Colorado are the designers.
Okay.
And I guess Arctic Acres basically has a license to distribute it here in Canada.
Okay.
Yeah, so all throughout Canada they do that.
Okay, cool. Where in Ontario? What's it?
Oh,
Down south.
South.
yes,
Yeah.
down south.
Okay.
I want to say a place, but actually I'm not sure, so I won't even say
Yeah,
it.
yeah. And do you feel, just for people who might be interested, like, do you feel comfortable sharing how much it cost you to bring it up?
It was 18.6.
Yeah,
With taxes
without the materials that we had to kind of
Yeah,
put
we had to
into
supply
it.
extra. Yeah, so
Okay. And was that shipping?
$18,600.
And then shipping or
No,
shipping?
that was shipped here.
Included, yeah.
Included. Okay.
Yeah, that was everything. That the kit itself was that much, and
Yeah.
then we had to add things like we needed the wood for the beds, we needed to add the gravel to place it and everything. So there was a lot that we had to add onto that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was how much it was.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good to know. And I mean, that's the thing. It's so beautiful, and you guys are going to be able to produce food for a long
And
time and throughout the winter. And
yeah, and it's not something everybody can get, and it's not really expected either. But there, like I said earlier, like there's other ways. Like we're trying other ways in the backyard and everything. Like that's not our main place. It's definitely an addition to our gardening.
Yeah.
But we're definitely trying to see what we can do just on our lot.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, some people, you know, like I thought maybe it was going to be like 60 grand. So the fact that it wasn't is like, you know, cool. And it seems doable for some people or community groups, you know, like we're talking about different things to have at, you know, these different community gardens that are expanding. And
yeah, I see that lots actually online is it's different charities or different groups getting together and having those, and kind of like what you do at the urban farm, having youth work there and build it all up. I see lots of that.
There's is their biggest one 42 foot?
42.
Yeah, they have a 42-foot one.
Yeah.
So that would be kind of cool if you wanted to do that from a community one, because you could do a similar setup like where the beds go all the way around, right? And you could section that off very easily for people, right? Like, oh, you can grow a little bit here, a little bit there, or you can work on a group project together. And then aesthetically, it's got a cool look to it. And if you can kind of, the cool thing too is if, like what I kind of liked about it, like there'd be days where it'd be really cold outside, but I'd be in there and it'd be nice and warm. So it'd be like snow on the ground, I'd be in there, like I'd have my jacket off, have my t-shirt on. And I like, it's kind of a cool thing being out there too. Like, I liked being out there, like, just trimming plants and stuff like that. Just it feels like if you're outside, but it doesn't feel like you're outside in the backyard. Like it does kind of cut you off from the neighbors in a way. It's, I don't know, I really enjoyed a lot being out there.
And being in the suburbs, you know, you have cars driving by and stuff, but in there it kind of blocks off a lot of that. So it's even like a good meditative place to go into.
And it just smells so good in there. Like that earth smells so good, and it's so nice that you get it all year. Yeah. It's so good. So good for everybody. Yeah. How does the little one, how does your daughter like it? Is she like, does she understand what's going on in there? Like,
no, she's still little, but if I'm going to pick tomatoes or something, she'll come with me.
She likes eating tomatoes.
Yes, she wants to eat all of them, but I'm like, no, let's pick them and then we'll eat them inside. I'll give her one or two to keep her preoccupied, but no, she likes going in there.
It's so cool that she gets to grow up with that. Like,
and that was another thing too that we talked about is like that was an experience we wanted to have for our kids too, and that was like a value we wanted to try to pass on. And it's like one of those things too where you like, if you tell the kid the thing, that's one thing, but if you're doing the thing, the kid's like, oh, like this thing, do this thing, because like it's so easy to talk about stuff, and I'm especially guilty of this. It's another thing to do it, right? And you find out sometimes a lot of your ideas are bullshit, and you need to change them and do different stuff. And I think, you know, if we say, like, you know, it's important to make sure you know where your food comes from, and we grow a bunch of our food here, our kids are going to grow up thinking, like, almost taking for granted, you grow your own food, which I'd much rather have, you know?
It's going to be funny if she's at school and she's like, oh, you guys don't have a dome in your mouth? You don't have this? That's so funny. That's awesome. Okay. Yeah, so what are the most positive aspects of the dome? And I mean, you guys kind of covered it already, but go into it again. And then are there any downsides or drawbacks? And would you recommend this to people? Like, with your experience, would you be like, oh, I don't know, or you need to be this type of person to have to manage it? Like,
I think it's a whole ecosystem on its own, right? So like, you know, downsides, the humidity could get pretty high in there, but you're gonna get that with anything with gardening. So I think it's its own little ecosystem that you have to kind of work with. I would say it's pretty much anybody could really manage one.
Yeah, it's the same principles as when you're gardening anywhere else. It's just you're gonna have to be aware that, like, on a day where it's plus 24 outside, if you don't have the fans on in there, it's going to be 34 in there or more, right? And you got to know that, like, okay, so what do you want to grow, right? Because you think, oh, well, I live in Northern Ontario and I want to grow a bunch of tomatoes like I grew this year. And I learned that tomatoes don't really like anything above 26 degrees. Really, they don't like anything above 24 degrees, right? And so what I found is I got these nice, beautiful flowers, and I had these great green, big leaves, and the plants looked super healthy, and then my flowers would just fall off. And I had an aphid problem that I was fighting with too. But what happened with that, I think, is I planted the stuff in there fairly early, and we had a heater out there, and admittedly we could have waited a couple of weeks more. It might have even been just a week if we waited a week more. But anyways, the plants got really weak because they got frostbite, And once when any plant gets weak, that's like disease, bugs, pests. They're like, oh, you have no self-defense system anymore? I'm gonna eat you. And so I had like this crazy aphid infestation. And then I learned, because I noticed I had ants, that ants will farm aphids. I thought that was so great. Like, it's super cool. And you think about how smart ants are. It's like, and they don't even kill the aphids, as I understand it.
They milk them.
Yeah, they milk them. Yeah, they give them a little back rub. They get some honeydew, and they're like, all right, go back and get some more of that for me. So I learned that. But yeah, no, I don't think you need to be a particular person. If you wanted to garden, you're still gonna have to do the little bits of work that are involved in gardening. It is a big investment. It is definitely a price restrictive thing.
Yeah.
But what I found is, like I said, it does a really good job of keeping the heat in there. I don't put any additional heat in there. It's got a 10-year warranty on all the panels and stuff like that, which is really good.
Yeah.
The shape of it's great because I don't have to really go out there and clean off snow too much. And if I do, I just got a broom and I just kind of like drag a little bit and it all just kind of falls off.
Okay.
And I can do that off the ground, climb up on a ladder or nothing like that during the winter.
Yeah.
I think our long-term goal will be preserving a lot. So basically at this point we're not planning on heating it during the couple months of winter where it gets where we barely have any sun.
Yeah.
We're just gonna let everything, freeze over. But long term we think we'll still keep doing that, but we'd want to preserve a lot more of what we grow during the summer and everything. I think that's kind of our long-term plan.
Yeah.
So I mean, we're not equipped with that. Like, there's no way we could feed ourselves at this point.
Yes.
That we're building blocks, right? And we're learning a lot. So we already know what we're going to do differently next year, and the dome is going to help us to be able to do that, to preserve whatever we're growing in there, and then maybe one day we can use what we've grown in there during the winter and eat that. That's kind of, I think our long-term plan.
Yeah, he was telling me earlier that you guys have like way too many pickles.
Oh, you have 30 jars.
30 jars, yeah.
But yeah, like if you can start making your sauce, like your spaghetti sauce and dilly beans and just even frozen things, or dehydrated, like there is so much you can do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and that's the thing too that we we thought a lot about what we want to grow again next year, and we were like, there's a lot of stuff that we grew that's like kind of nice. Yeah. That they're not our staples though, right?
Yeah.
And so like potatoes we eat a lot of, garlic we eat a lot of, onions we eat a lot of, and so next year our garden's probably gonna be a lot more boring.
Yeah.
But it's gonna be stuff we eat all the time.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And like so we'll change a couple of the growing. Like I'm really interested in trying those potato towers.
Yeah.
I see people get really good yields out of there, and I don't have the space. And I don't know how many pounds of potatoes we'd eat in a year, but I'd like to get around 200 pounds. If we'll see how
we have
can
big
do that.
ideas.
Yeah.
We have 2 grapevines, and Jordan's like, how do I make wine for the year? I'm like, that's not happening on our lot.
No, but we planted a bunch of other berry bushes, and you might have some berry wine.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Until I can
just
figure that out.
imagine these like leaning towers of potatoes. They're gonna be like taller than your house.
Yeah.
Then the neighbors will come over.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Yeah, and so from your social media and from the little tour that I did when I got here, it looks like you're developing a lot of other food growing systems on your land. Can you talk about some of those things, like what you're doing other than the dome?
Yeah, so there's the dome, which I'll have a water. So there's the dome, and right now we're planning on that basically being our annual garden, because we have to be in there more often, because we have to kind of control certain things of the climate and humidity, all that kind of thing. Then we have 3 beds that we're planting also vegetables and that type of thing. There's one that's a perennial bed. And then we just, actually this year, how many fruit bushes did we? 30, yeah. So we purchased 30 fruit trees / bushes. Shrubs.
From Bill?
Yes, from Beautiful Field Farm. And we basically planted a bunch of berries in the backyard, and we've got 2 trees added to our front yard. And we've also got, I think, 6 fruit shrubs in the front yard. So, and then we just, this is still in the works, but we just tilled a lot of our, like, almost half of our front yard, and we're going to be adding wildflowers from Northern Wildflowers. Going to be planting those.
Cool.
And planting a bunch of other flowers, because that's something too where at first we were like, well, we don't eat flowers because we're not going to eat them, but you do need flowers, pollinators and everything. So in the front yard we're doing a lot there. And yeah, I think that's the gist of it. Just
so that was like
thank you.
I think that like I like the idea of the fruit bushes because they're relatively low maintenance. Yeah. And there's lots of fruit bushes we grow around here that people don't think you can eat, and you really can. And that's the other thing, like, I think about too. I'm like, there's indigenous people living here for a long time, and there's lots of stuff to eat. So this idea that there's no food here, it's like, there's food everywhere. We're just not, we don't know where to look.
Yeah. Going back to what Jordan even said about not wanting to do like 12-hour, 18-hour days, you know, that's just not what we'd like for our lifestyle. So it's funny because, you know, you think with everything we do, we would love gardening. It's like what we live for, but it's we like gardening. We like what it brings to us, but we want to be like lazy gardeners. Like we're planting all those perennials because we want the benefits and everything, but we don't want to be out there all the time. So I just think that's kind of funny because I could see people thinking that we want to be out there all day, but we don't.
No, exactly.
Yeah, I like to go out there, like, I like going out there a few hours, like, so, like, on a Saturday, if I were to pick an ideal Saturday for doing gardening stuff, I'd get up maybe early, like, say at 4:30, I'd go hang out in my office, I'd read, hang out, do my own thing, relax, and then we'd have breakfast, that kind of thing. I'd probably go outside closer to 11, and then go out in the dome or whatever and trim up all the plants that need to be trimmed up and tie up what needs to be tied up and go see how everything else is doing, look around and all that kind of stuff, and be done working by 2 or 3. And even when I'm doing the work too, like I like to go out there, I'll put on some music, I'll put on a podcast. I'm out there hanging out, I'll have a beer, like, you know, I turn it into a thing I enjoy doing, right?
Yeah.
And then like I said, I love being out there in the dome hanging out because you're out there doing a little bit of work. I'm not working hard because I got all day. I'm the boss, so I mean for me, right?
Yeah, and you know, we have so much respect for farmers. We
love
our farmers, but we're not farmers, and you know, we're not gonna you know, sometimes we get the crazy idea maybe we should be farmers, but I don't think we're farmers. It's just not who we are. So I think what we're doing here is you know, a compromise where, you know, we could be growing a lot of stuff and then sourcing locally without having to, you know, make a big shift in our lifestyle.
Yeah, totally.
Well, and then too, the food model that we all rely on nowadays is relatively new, and it all comes after World War II. And it has a lot to do with a surplus of tractors and stuff like that from the war effort. And then a huge surplus in, I think it was ammonium nitrate or something like that, is what basically becomes our fertilizer. And it came from ammunition factories. And so we had these big ammunition factories that were feeding the war effort. And like, well, what are we going to do now? And then they found out, like, you know, you go and you take this nitrogen, this is basically what it is, and you sprinkle it on the grass. And I was listening to a farmer that recently talked about it on a podcast, and he says, you know, he said, go sprinkle it on a little part, and then compare the two. And he's like, it was green and lush and whatever. And think about being a farmer in the late 40s, and someone walks up and shows you that. And you're like, I can almost double my harvest doing this. And so you go from being like, I hope we have a good harvest this year, to being like, I can grow so much food that I don't care if I lose half my crop. And you think about like the world we live in today, how much of a result of that is from that cheap energy, that cheap fertilizer and all that. Now, of course, we're seeing that it wasn't free. Of course, there was so we have eroded topsoil and all this kind of thing. But that's, I have hope, I have a little bit of hope that people are kind of realizing that. They're realizing that the scale at which we've been doing things is pretty unfeasible, that more people are going to have to get involved on a local level if we want to maintain any kind of standard of living, because I kind of think that energy costs, regardless of the climate aspect, are going to continue to go up, because I think it's harder to get access to energy. Like, I think we have to dig deeper or drill deeper for our oil. We have to, say the tar sands, right? tar sands are not like, say, in Texas where you have that sweet crude, where I understand that basically comes out, you have to refine it very little, and then you can use it. And you can use it in a lot of application, and it's like really high-grade oil. Then you take our Alberta oil, which is good oil, but you have to process light to steam it and all these other kind of things. So how much energy goes into producing the oil? Because then you have to figure out what your net gain is, right? And there was something I heard recently that really kind of struck a chord with me. I was like, yeah, how much energy are we using to get our energy? Because it's like, and then also the huge expansion we had after World War II. And think about now, all of those people who grew up in that generation, the boomers, we have a very aging population. We have a lot of people going on to social assistance, like in their later years. And we have a young population that has to fix all that stuff that they built and take care of them. And our energy costs 3x what their energy costs. And like you look at the size of our population and all that kind of stuff, and I'm not, like, the way I look at that, I'm like, we're in real trouble. Like, we have like this huge highway, like, we take for granted how amazing it is that you can get on a highway and drive from like BC to Newfoundland. And there's railways that go across that whole thing. And so, oh yeah, that should just work. So you know how many miles that is, or kilometers that is? And then like the work, and all the work that goes into that, not to mention workers are paid a lot more. But you think about what a worker was getting paid, even if they were in a union in the late 40s, right? Nothing compared to what they're getting now. And that all factors into your cost of maintenance. So it's one of those things too where, Mario, you're gonna knock something over. It's one of those things where, like, you know, we have all these big, beautiful, great systems, but more recently I'm having trouble understanding how we're gonna maintain these and our standard of living. I feel like we were kind of living fat on the hog for a while because of, there was a lot of things that kind of worked out for us. And I feel like if you look at, and especially when you look at what's, say, going on over in Europe there, Europe I'm really worried for. Like, we're not going to be in bad straits as what Europe is. But Europe right now, where are they going to get their energy from? They were really dependent on Russia for a long time. Now, aside from all of that, what's going on, and the morality of that and whatever else, those people in those countries in Europe still need to heat their house. Regardless of what's going on. You know what I mean? And like, and if you're going to be talking about, like, you know, we can't get energy from there, it's like, I don't think we realize how much, like, say, natural gas and how much oil and stuff we all use all the time, or coal even. And it's like, and even say if you want to get into doing like your renewable energies, how do we make those? We burn non-renewable energies to make them, and we use non-renewable resources to make them. And they all need to be maintained. And let's not pretend that there's no economic impact from doing that on all kinds of countries too, because as I understand it, we have pretty good grade, like, say, lithium and nickel and a couple of the other things you need for batteries here in Canada. There's a few other countries that have it, that have better working practices. But there's a lot of countries where a lot of these minerals come from where they don't take care of the people that are there. It's probably not so crazy to even say it's bordering on slave labor. Like, it's really not a condition that anyone would want to work in. And as we push to use more of these resources, we have to consider, like, are we basically saying then that we think it's okay to do that over there because it's out of sight, out of mind, right? Because let's not pretend that hasn't been going on the whole time. It's still going on now. Like, even where they mine sulfur in a lot of cases. It's awful. It's not a life that I'd want for any of my kids. And so I worry about how many of these things we're not being realistic about. I think it's super great that we shouldn't be doing things that pollute the earth we live on. We live on the earth. We have this symbiotic relationship with Mother Nature. We should also realize that Mother Nature is not this benefic being, nature goddess that wants to take care of everybody. Nature doesn't really care about fair. It doesn't really care about justice in the way that we think about it. She can be cold and hard. She can be very fruitful and forgiving in lots of ways too. But don't mistake her kindness for weakness. Like, you got to really respect Mother Nature. And there's a like, because that's a bit of a digression, but I kind of see that, like, when you hear, like, it blows me away how people think about, like, say, bears. People are like, oh, bears are these cute cuddly animals, and then, oh, blah blah blah. It's like, they will eat you and kill you, and not think twice about it. They're not. It's not Winnie the Pooh. They're animals. You know what I mean? And they want to eat and stuff like that. And you're just walking food.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's like, and then you'll say something like, a male bear will murder a cub to put the female bear, the boar. How does it go? They use pig terms. Yeah, I can't remember anyway. Sow. Sow is the female, boar is the male. No, because they're related to pigs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the sow. So anyways, the male will kill a cub because it'll put the female back in heat or eustrus, I think is what they call it.
Oh, right, okay.
So so he can pass on his genes.
Right.
Because if he doesn't think that's his bear,
Uh-huh.
he takes that bear out and he says, no, I got my bear.
Mm-hmm.
Right? People hear that and they're like, what about mama bear? And then, so mama bear, after the baby bear is dead, she'll eat the bear because she's like, calories. I want to survive this winter.
Mm-hmm.
He's dead, or the bear's dead, right? Can't help that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna die too. And you're like, she would eat her cub? It's like, yes, they don't have the same sort of morality we have. Not at all. Nature's not like what we are.
Yeah.
You know, she's a little harsh.
Yeah.
Do you blame the mother bear for doing that? Of course not. But I feel like we have these unrealistic expectations, although rooted in good intentions. And we're correcting, I think. We're doing better. I think more localism is really good. I think rehumanizing a lot of our interactions is really good. I think it's going to happen because I think we're going for tougher times. I think that's almost, I feel like it's almost like for sure going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
I hope I'm wrong.
I think it is happening.
I think so too.
It's happening.
my hope or the silver lining for that is that people will start to realize that they're very entitled. They don't have any real concept of what the real world is like. It's a much rougher place than we all grew up thinking it was. I also don't blame the older generations for bringing us up in this delusion of it because, like we talked about the whole farming thing earlier, you want to give your kids a better life. You don't want to tell them about this and that happened in the past. Now, there's no, I heard this more recently, there's no like solutions to problems, there's trade-offs. And I think that to me really struck with me more recently, where it's like we like to talk about certain issues, like if we only did this, it would be set right. If only we did this, it would be set right. And I think really what it is like, if you do that, that'll work, and it will correct some of these problems that you've pointed out. However, it will have this drawback, and this drawback. And then people will be like, oh, well, then there's no system we can do. So no, you just have to make the decision knowing full well there will be negative impact. So like the rising cost of energy for in a country like Canada, where even our poorest people are not as poor as the rest of the people in the world, they'll be hit bad. But the poorest people in the world with rising energy costs will starve and they'll freeze to death. So as we make this push to making, like, wanting to use more renewable green energy and stuff like that, we have to understand that the economic position, it puts a lot of people in the world into starvation and death. So it's not all good. I understand the impetus. I understand the seriousness of it. There's no free rides. There's something always has to be paid off in the end, and we have to be very careful when we're making these very big societal changes, and we're talking about a huge shift. And even if you go and you talk to your grandparents, and then the world we live in today and the world that we live in, you wouldn't have even be able to tell them when they were a kid that the world was going to be like what it is now. Like, it's crazy. Yeah, there's no free rides, and it's just and that's why, like, I feel good about how we're trying to get involved with growing our own food and stuff like that, because we're trying to take responsibility for our own food production. We're trying to do more that way and live more about that. I think you have to really kind of do that as much as you can and realize that, like, yeah, there's going to be work, and you don't always want to do it, but it starts with you.
Well, and there's, the thing about the green technology, it's like, it's still, there's the concept of it's a techno fix, it's not actually addressing any of the systemic issues that are causing all of these problems.
It's addressing the symptoms and not the issue. Not the cause.
And we see that with some farmers. Like, we've seen, I have a friend who's invested in a solar tractor, and then I have friends who are just like getting rid of all tractors and going back to horses and like learning how to use draft horses. And I knew a farmer who's going into oxen because he was actually allergic to horses. So like there's also people who are like going way back and just being like, okay, what can we do without fossil fuels at all? You know, like what is this going to look like? And it's going to be a massive, huge shift for sure.
Well, and speaking about, say, energy expended, one of the old things that we used to have as an energy source was human resource. It was a renewable resource. That's why people had big families. That was the renewable resource.
Yes, yeah.
You went out there and you worked with your hands, your body. And do we want to be doing work that's so hard that it breaks down our bodies and all that kind of stuff to that point? No. But is it, because we think about this as modern people. We'll go and we'll work 8 hours. And they'll say, well, we've got to go to the gym. Why do you got to go to the gym? Because the work that you do is not taxing enough to keep you in shape. You look at like these guys who were farmers and these guys who were fishermen, and like just an average dude would kick the shit out of any average guy today, like just strength and stuff like that. And like, so her dad is 62, 63?
62.
62? I challenge any 20-year-old man to out shovel that guy on anything.
Yeah.
I've seen few men work like that, and he's just built different.
And he wasn't even farming the way his family was, but
Yeah.
still in him. Yeah.
But he's like just a hard-working guy, and he's got like that foundational like all-day work. And like I don't know if you grew up around farmers. Like there was this guy Dave I grew up with, and he was a farm boy, and he had like I always say he had a neck like this, like you couldn't choke him if you wanted to. Like he was a big boy, and the kind of work where you're hauling stuff all day long, it's not the 1 hour, 2 hour gym muscle. That's all day work muscle.
Yeah.
You deal with a guy who's like, oh, I could do this all day. You're like, I could do this for an hour. He's like, I could do it all day. That's a different kind of guy, right?
Yeah, it's endurance, it's everything. Well, yeah, we were just doing, moving some straw bales the other day for the urban farm, and they were all soaking wet and full of mud. And so me and Matt Graveline from Orme Organics, the vermicomposting company here, we were doing it, and it was, I hadn't done, the urban farm doesn't take like the 12 hours of labor that I've worked on like other farms, so I'm out of practice, and I was like, wow, this is intense, just a few hours of this really endurance labor. But we were joking about like, we don't need the gym if we're doing this.
So I think that is what it is, like a little bit. I think you go and you work hard like that, it keeps your body in shape. I think you have lower anxiety because you've expended, like, so when you talk about, we know that if you work out, it'll decrease your anxiety. It'll alleviate your depression to a degree. I'm not saying it's cure all, fix all, 100% make you great, but we know it has a positive effect. And you consider about how we all were for forever. You all worked. And a good point to that kind of thinking too. Her grandmother, when we were in Portugal, they say, go out and help Tia Dahlia, go help her move some wood. So I'm out there and grabbing a couple pieces of wood. She's like loading me up, right? And then she's got one last piece. I said, oh yeah, give that to me there, Tia. And she's, no, eu não trabalho, não comer, or something like that. She says, if I don't work, I don't eat.
Yeah.
This woman's like 80-something years old.
Yeah.
But she has like, if I don't work, I don't eat. That's that old school way of thinking. It's like, no, you work, you eat. You earn it. But it's even too like, you'll hear, there's a parable I'm thinking of in my head that I'm not remembering properly, but it's like, your bread tastes better when you work. If you don't work, your food doesn't taste as good. When you're really hungry, when you're really thirsty, then you'll appreciate it. And think about even like that old practice people used to have of grace for food. Because, food used to be really scarce. Like I was listening to this thing about 1500s Tudor England, so King Henry VIII. And it was a common thing that every year people would starve. There was a disease that they thought existed where people would basically bleed from their bowels. And it turns out actually in late stages of starvation, you have a hemorrhage in your lower intestines, and that's what that was. So they just had accepted that, sometimes in this part of the year, people get sick. Well, they were all starving to death. So that means you had, on a regular basis, mothers, daughters, sons, watching and holding their dead family. Like, we just have this. So when you said grace, then you were like, thank God we have food.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter if you believe in God or any of that kind of stuff. If you, whatever higher power, whatever good force in the world at all you want to label it to, that idea that you had food in front of you, now you're like, I don't like this food. In those days, you just, okay, that's more for me. You go find something, I guess. You know what I mean? Like you were grateful for it.
Yeah.
You were grateful for every day you woke up, that you weren't bleeding out of your bowels.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, it's sort of a
real.
trivial thing in a sense because of how easy things are. But like, to me, it's like we're born into this country that has beautiful resource, a beautiful landscape, and tons of resources, and we're wasting so much energy. We're wasting so much time. We're so ungrateful. We're so entitled. If something isn't the way we like it, we just yell about it. And it's like, go out there with a little bit of gratitude and a little bit of love in your heart. And part of that gratitude too is even like realize like you're not as good as you think you are. You know, we're all a little messed up. You know, we got all of our issues, whatever it might be. You know, you grew up in this household, you grew up in this situation, or whatever it is. We've all got our baggage. And you got to realize that, like, you know, I'm gonna screw up. And because I know I'm gonna screw up, I know you're gonna screw up. But if, like, you know, if you have good intentions and we're working together, and I know that, like, you know, you didn't do it in a way that you were trying to hurt me, I can give you the benefit of the doubt. I'd be like, hey man, you know, that was kind of fucked up, but you know, we can work on it. All right, fine. Then but it's that little bit of humility. It's that little bit of like humbleness. It's that grounding in reality, and that's what I love when you talk to these farmers too. Like these silly ideas, even with the permaculture stuff that we want to do. Like, oh, we can just do this and do that, and it's like, no, you can't. You have to like actually put in work here. You gotta actually do this. It's like you can't just have a bush like that and whatever. You can't have these unrealistic expectations because you're living with nature. And nature doesn't have any time for your romanticism. She doesn't have any time for your idealism. She doesn't have any time for no-nonsense ideas that don't face up to the hard nature of what reality is. And even though it's sort of a negative thing in a sense, or like let's say a source of discomfort, or like let's say like it's a good thing in a way that life was hard, let's say, for people we inherited this system from. Because life was harder for them, they had to be realistic. They had to be grounded in stuff. I'm rambling.
It's okay. Well, and we know that like settler life, especially people coming to here, you know, they were like, they had experienced some of the hardest conditions ever, you know, and a lot of them were escaping famine in Europe. And when they came here, and there's abundant food systems, and you know, the idea that there wasn't scars on the earth from the agricultural practices that were taking place here because they were doing permaculture. Like they were doing permaculture. It just wasn't called that. But yeah, so people did have really hard lives. You know, farmers did have really hard lives, and so I think that is why maybe too, like settler farmers, European farmers, that push to get away from farm life is so strong because it was so hard coming here and figuring out how to be in the northern climates and working in boreal forest areas and the shield and all the rocks, and like you can imagine like all of the toil that happened at those times.
Well, and what's interesting too with a lot of the people that were leaving Europe and in those times too is like, say in the States, for example, you got these Puritans, and they were basically these people who left Europe because they were like, none of them read the Bible. They're all basically sinners. And these were like strict. Like these people believed like you worked hard every day, you like went to bed when you were like dog tired, and you and your wife would have relations when you would have kids, and that was it. Like it was very like no joy, no pleasure, all hard work. Now, in one hand, that work ethic was really good for building a country. It's super dehumanizing. There's no joy in life in that. There's no laughter in life like that. It's very like, this is what we do, and you're surviving. But and like that, it's kind of I always kind of think it's funny because like I always kind of thought of myself as like Canadian kind of thing, and I always kind of had an idea of Europe. For a long time, I always thought Europe was like really sophisticated and stuff like that. And they have a more mature culture in some way, but they're also like they're kind of free spirit in a different way. Like I think it's probably because of their maturity. Like they're kind of like, that stuff don't matter. Like when we were in Portugal, it was no, that's never mind.
I can bring it back to this question sheet. So what is your ultimate dream and vision for your household food production? You kind of touched on it with the preservation.
Yeah.
But still talking about that. And, you know, like in 5 years, like where do you think you'll be or want to be? And then the other part of that is what's your dream and vision for Sudbury?
Okay, so for our home, I think in 5 years, I would hope that things are up and running. You know, the fruit is, you know, abundant, and we've got a better system on how to grow what we want to be growing. I think that's probably the goal for 5 years from now. And then the vision would be, you know, feeding ourselves as much as possible here on our land. And then for Sudbury, I think just if more people did what we were doing, maybe we would be in a better situation where more people are caring about what they're eating, not eating, you know, things that are unhealthy. Like maybe more people will be healthy, and then that would just make people have better well-beings, right, in general.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree with that. I think for sure in the next 5 years, I'd like to have our fruit production like up and kind of in a swing for sure. I think as the plants mature, they'll produce more. I hope. And then also too, I think really figuring out how to maximize the yield on those staples that I kind of mentioned we want to have. Like after because our garlic we've grown, say, and it's been good, but it hasn't been great. So it'll be like those kind of changes, right? Like, oh, this was a decent harvest. How do we get a good harvest? How do we get a great harvest? And then when it comes to, like, say, Sudbury as a whole, I'd like to see, I think it would be good for more people to grow more of their food because I think it would be better for them. I also don't think that's super realistic. I think that if I were to set a low bar, it would be more local investment in the way of buying your food locally, sourcing your food locally, sourcing as many products as possible locally, and I think there is a potential to discover a sort of Sudbury pride, a sort of Sudbury flavor. I think we can come together at the table by farming, by making food together, and figuring out what the flavor of Sudbury is. I'd like to see. I think it would be really cool because of where Sudbury is, if it could become like a sort of example of how a city with lots of rural aspects to it become a food producer, a sort like. I think we have a lot of farmland around here, and I think it has a lot of potential that, like, if anywhere in Ontario, I think we have a chance that we could really produce a lot of food here. I think we could feed a lot of families here. I think part of that is we have to invest in our farmers. We have to bet on our farmers. I think that a lot of food future is unsure, and I think but the longer food chains, and I think if we invest in our local food and we help those guys and we try to build not fortitude, like a strength, like a resilience in our food chain here. I think we can do it. I think we have the people here for it. I think there's a lot of Sudbury's good hard work, and I think they appreciate that localism. I think they're proud of being Northern Canadians, and I think that is a good soil for this to take hold.
Yeah, and there's been, you know, that's sort of been something I've thought about coming back to Sudbury and farming and being like, what would it actually take to feed all of Sudbury? Like, how many farms and how many acres would actually need to be in production to feed everyone? Like, everyone, where every family gets a food box every week, you know, for the summer months, and then we, you know, figure stuff out for the winter. And I had actually posed that to one of the farmers that I was working for. I was like, you know, on your 5 acres, if you had all the labor you needed how much food could you produce a week? Like, how many food boxes could you produce a week on 5 acres? And he said 350. So when you scale that up to like whatever, how many households are in Sudbury, if you're thinking of little 5 acre parcels of that, or some farms that have 10 acres in production or 15, but nothing giant, you know, it's actually not that many farms. It's like 115 farms that are like producing 5 acres, but they have fully functional and have their labor to the point where people aren't exploited, to like still good working conditions. So, and that, but I mean, that's just the summer. It's not talking about the winter crops, but still, like, that's realistic. And I feel like we need to, as in up here, set that vision, figure out exactly what those numbers are, and then work backwards. Because maybe we're only, like you said, you know, you were talking about producing 30% of what you're eating. Well, what if Sudbury could produce 30% of what we're eating? And when Eat Local Sudbury was still around, I think the stat at that point was like we were producing 1% of what we eat.
Right.
So that's gonna have to change. It's gonna have to change. So we need young people like us, you know, with these visions and just saying like, yes, this is where we need to be, and then work backwards and figure it out.
I've wondered about that too. Like, say, how do you sell this idea? Because the thing with us is we're always preaching to the converted in a sense, right?
Yeah.
You're all like, because we interview farmers and all that kind of stuff, and we're generally, because of who the farmers will follow, say, we're going to find ones that are, say, more inclined to doing what we're kind of doing, sort of thing. When we talk to them, they're like, yeah, right? And that's great and fun and stuff, but I try to think, like, you know, how do you tell some teenager like this is really important? And maybe they're a good example because they get it. Like, it seems like I mean, they've been taught it lots in school. Like, they kind of get, like, there's some kind of crisis when it comes to the world, like with the weather and stuff like that, the climate. So that's something that I think they're inclined to think like, wow, green energy, that's what we gotta do. It's like, oh yeah, that's part of it. Certainly part of it. We could definitely be doing something that's better for how we get our energy. 100%. What are we gonna eat? And it's like, oh, okay, so what we need is a bunch of you young people. I don't want you to be a TikToker or an influencer. I don't want you to be famous. I want you to work really, really hard on a farm, like by yourself most of the time, with your family and a few other people. And if you don't have like a decent sized farm, you'll have your friends because you'll work with them every day. I want you to work really, really hard because we need you. Like, we need you. And like, I hope that's like, please start farming. I don't know how you sell it to like a kid, right? Like, I think, like, now I grew up in a different situation, but like, I don't know, like, if I were a kid, I don't know, and especially because our culture now too, we all think, oh, you should follow your dreams and this and that, and that's great because we have the ability to create and do all kinds of cool things by having these cool individuals that are born out of our culture that really wants individuals to like fully grow into who they're going to be. But then also too, it's like we're forgetting about that farmer, that nameless farmer, and that's a lot of time thankless job. You go out there, you work hard every day, you get up really early every morning, cold, rain, shine, doesn't matter. And most people aren't going to say thank you. No one's going to know what you did. So like, that's I hope, I really hope that, because I think it's a big ask. Like I think that's what we have to do, but I also think it's a big ask for a lot of these kids. And it's a totally foreign thing with the way our culture is set up. Because I remember when I was like going into high school, it was like, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be a whatever. Like, it was all these like sort of white collar type of jobs, and there was a bit of a push for blue collar stuff too. But there was a clear distinction of what was more desirable, right? And again, back to that whole parents wanting better for their kids kind of thing. That makes sense. But then it becomes about the prestige of the job, the money you make, and all these things. And I can't discount people for wanting those things. We're social animals, and that part of that's a hierarchy, right? We want to be known or be special or be seen or whatever, and I get that, but that's the one thing I wonder about is how do we because we're getting older all the time. It's really, you know, maybe we'll have another kid, but after that, I mean, it's their world. that they're gonna get. It's the people around them that they're gonna have to work with. We're gonna be old, you know, and we can hopefully be somewhat wise or have learned something so we can help them not fall in a couple of the pits we fell into. But they're gonna have to work really, really hard in a way that we didn't, and probably more like our grandparents did, and maybe even harder. It might be more difficult because at least in those times there was a little more social cohesion. Because like nowadays we have a hard time. Like if you look at how fractured, say, the political thing is, we have a huge group of people living in fundamentally different realities, and not like superficial little differences. I mean, totally different agreements on what the nature of objective reality, or if there even is an objective reality. And you know, if you would have 50 years ago told someone that, like, well, it's all just, you know, whatever you want, they'd be like, what do you mean? Like, how do we have a conversation? Like, we can't even actually have a conversation or a disagreement because we're not actually even talking about the same thing at all. And I find a lot of people are talking past each other, so they're gonna have to deal with that, as well as having to do all of this really hard, thankless work. And it's a tall order. I'm hoping that, say, the medicine, which will taste bad, which I think is going to be the hard times we're going to get, will be the cure to that. I hope the dose isn't so much it kills a bunch of us. Unfortunately, I think a lot of us are it's gonna be really hard. And I think a lot of people, they're not gonna want to put up with it or deal with it. And
yeah, well, in these hard times, like, maybe more people will band together, you know, and see, like, we can't give up on each other, and, like, we do need each other in a big way.
It's all we have.
These other aspects may dissolve. It might be like, you know, what we see in zombie apocalypse movies, like all these people come together who wouldn't normally associate to each other, but they have to come together because they have to survive. And
but and to sort of take that analogy a little bit further, you're going to have very different groups that come up. Right, and we already have that starting to happen. So because we have this totally split apart sort of reality perception, we're getting a lot of different new sort of subcultures, subgenres that are starting, which is interesting. And like, I don't know where that's going to go, but I think that's because of how we communicate, and because how you have different groups forming in different areas. And like, because you'll hear people talk about like echo chambers, right? Like no one talks to the opposite opinion anymore, right? And partly that's because they're living in different worlds. But then you get these creations that, like, these little fractious groups, even within the groups that agree with each other. Like they'd be like, no, that's whatever, you're stupid, that's totally wrong, you're almost like those guys. And then so you get these different groups, but it's not a positive or a negative thing, I think, because it's just a natural thing that happens. Like, I think cultures rise and fall, empires rise and fall. I think partly what we're sort of witnessing is the American empire she's getting old, she's falling apart. You know, I think that's kind of what we're seeing here, and because of that, a lot of the stuff that we grew up around or relying on or taking for granted, those things are going to go away. But something new will be born of that. Some of it will be much better. Some of it'll be worse, but it's just like in nature, things die, they go back into the soil, they get reabsorbed and repurposed into something else. What was pine needles becomes the food for a maple tree, or vice versa, or you know, whatever animal was eating the whatever, you know, like the point I'm getting is this. It's falling apart and a new thing's going to come out of it. And I'm curious to see what it's going to be, but I think, we gotta be realistic. We gotta be a little bit pragmatic and work. And I think also, though, like I sound really doom and gloom about this, but I also think that there's going to be a lot of people that are going to rise to the occasion. And I think those few people, it only takes like a couple of people to rise to that, to be an example. And then other people say, well, if that guy did it, I can do it too. If that woman did it, I can do it too.
And that sort of leads me to like what sparked this podcast, because I think what you're doing is you're giving people like that a voice in these sort of things to be like, okay, these people are doing it, you know? So yeah, what made you decide podcast?
So I think initially it was basically we just wanted to talk to people.
Yeah.
Because basically we were just, we don't have much experience gardening or doing this kind of thing. So we're like, we want to talk to people who are doing this. And then we're like, if we start a podcast, because, lots of people listen to podcasts nowadays, it's something that's, pretty prevalent. It's pretty prevalent. So we thought, well, if we're talking to these people, maybe others will want to hear what we're talking about as well. And, those people could hear what's going on, and then maybe they could, make some positive changes as well, right?
Yeah.
And then we really just fell in love with talking to farmers, I think. We really like farmers. They're just so inspiring, and we have lots of respect for them. And what I noticed is when we started the podcast, when we started talking to these farmers, like we mentioned earlier, it's like a thankless job where we gave them a stage and they just went with it. Like, I think people don't get the opportunity to hear what our producers have to say. So locally, I think it's a really attractive idea for our community to hear from people who work in the community, who produce, and giving them a stage through the podcast, I think is just really great. I really like doing it.
Yeah, no, there are tons of these super smart, warm-hearted, good, down-to-earth people out there, and they're working really hard, and we were hoping to get a little bit of their knowledge from them. We thought other people would benefit from that as well. And what I found is I think a lot of the people that we interview actually like it a lot because they get to hear what other people in the same space as what they're doing are doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's super cool, and I love helping with that. Like, I think like it was like a conversation we wanted to hear. So we were like, well, maybe if we try to have conversations we'd like to hear, maybe someone else will get something out of it.
Well, it was funny. A couple weeks ago or last week, Jordan went to a bonfire, and there was somebody there, and she said, "Oh, I just started listening to a new podcast. It's called Our Growing Experiment."
Awesome.
Just talking to your sister,
Yeah.
She says, "Oh yeah, that's my brother-in-law."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
So that's kind of
awesome.
fun to know that, people are still listening to it and getting something out of it.
That'd be the one, if anything come out of the podcast, the one person one time said, "I started listening to this podcast and I was there." That was worth it.
Yeah, it was.
It was just kind of funny because like someone's like talking about you, like, and that was that because we were on CBC there not too long ago, and there's a guy at work. He says, "Were you on CBC the other day?" 'Cause I hadn't really said anything about it.
Yeah.
I'm like, "Yeah, actually, yeah." It was like 7:30 in the morning or something like that.
Nice.
He said, "Oh yeah, well, I was pretty sure it was you. You have a distinctive voice." I was like, "Oh, okay." Well.
Cool, that's awesome. Yeah, well, and that's the thing too, like the Sudbury Food Policy Council is just sort of trying to get back into the swing of things. We have the new council, so we're trying to re-engage city council on this kind of stuff. So like your podcast we'll push it for people to listen to, because I think that's the thing, like beyond just chatting at a farmer's market, like they don't really have a chance to speak or share what they're doing, and often don't even have time to listen to each other too much because everyone's so busy and on their other piece of the land and doing all that stuff. So
yeah, and I think for us, it's not, we don't really care if there's 1 million people listen to it or just 100 people. It's just, we just want to be having these conversations, and we want to provide these conversations to those who are interested in it, right? Like, I think that's
like
for us.
In the case of, say, Priscilla there, I think that's her name. It sounded like she was getting something out of it. Yeah. It sounded like she kind of got to find this little local story thing that she didn't know was there, and it sounded like she was getting some enjoyment out of it. And, I mean, if she got some, I mean, that's great right there. Like that's if just that, and I think some people got some stuff out of it, and we get a lot by talking to different people, and it's been an enriching experience for us for sure. Yeah. And I can tend to be a homebody. I know we can tend to be a homebody together. And it's been good to go out and meet these other people. And it's good also to know, too, that, like, you're not the only one that thinks like that. You're like, there's other people who like, I don't sound like a crazy person, too. Like, because I'm at work, and I'm like, I want to build this big garden or else. And my boss is like, yeah, but, you can, like, buy a tomato for, like, a whole pack for, like, $2, right? And you don't have to do all that work. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but, like... But then now I'm kind of laughing because tomatoes keep getting more expensive and I have lots of them.
Yeah, I get it. I know. Even with the envy. Well, I think that's it for my questions. I have one final one. It's a hard, heavy hitter, and it is this. If you were a fruit or a vegetable, which fruit or vegetable would you be and why?
Oh, jeez. I never even thought of anything like that.
Take a moment.
For some reason, I thought of fruit right away.
I was gonna say barley or rye.
You?
Yeah.
Okay, fruit,
I can see
vegetable, or
that.
grain. That's allowed.
Okay.
I'll
yeah.
allow it.
I was like, it's a food, it's a thing you eat. You process it a little, but because I was thinking it's like kind of a staple. You can use it to make a lot of things I like beer and whiskey and bread.
Yeah, it's a very accurate one for you.
Yeah.
What would I be? You know what's funny? Orange popped into my head, but I don't even like oranges that much. So
No, you'd be like a marmelo.
a marmelo.
Yeah.
What's
Be
that?
specific.
I don't know
to
what that is in
Portugal.
English.
It's was it quincy or something?
Oh yeah,
Was it
quince.
Quince,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So
I've never seen one.
yeah, there's lots of quince trees in Portugal, and a staple over there is marmelada, which is marmalade, which
Yeah.
you know I don't think people have too often around here.
Older people
Unless
used
older
to allow
people.
it. Yeah.
But over there, it's
British
like
people.
you're gonna have cheese with marmelada on your bread.
And it's made from quince.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's quince
Cool.
jam here, but
Okay.
Portuguese do it better than
Yeah,
people
yeah.
here.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, these are very good answers.
Yeah.
I've never heard the grain answer or a quince answer.
Yeah, well, we're a little out there.
So that's very innovative, like your dome. And yeah, I just want to congratulate you on everything you're doing here. It's really inspiring. I think it's great too that you're doing it in the city. I think we need more of that.
Mhm.
Food, not lawns.
Mhm.
And yeah, thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming to see us, and
For
it was
sure.
this was really cool to have this kind of a conversation.
Yeah, we have these conversations often with friends and family, but I think maybe some people will appreciate hearing a little bit about us if
Yeah.
they've listened to hours of us
Yeah.
talking to other people.
They've heard enough of me. At least they heard more of you today.
That's true. That's true.
Awesome.
Anyway,
Okay,
perfect. Thanks.
thanks.